Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weekly Dharma Gathering. My name is Gail Spiva. Welcome to part 7 of the Encountering Basic Goodness series. In this 8-session exploration, David Perrin and Dr. Shanté Paradigm Smalls lead meditators of any practice level in cultivating stability, clarity, and strength in body, speech, and mind through meditation techniques which draw on ancient wisdom for the contemporary world. Each session consists of short talks, meditation sessions, Q&A, and experiential learning. Sessions are 90 minutes and can be attended live, or students can watch the recording later. Dr. Shanté Paradigm Smalls will lead tonight's session, Encountering Basic Goodness, Part 7, Freedom. So tonight's session will be recorded. So if you prefer not to be seen, please turn off your camera feature. Please note that you will be recorded when asking a question. If you have a question during the guided instruction or the talk, please feel free to enter it into the chat box at any time, and we'll be able to address it during the discussion period. The recording of tonight's gathering can be accessed within 48 hours via your purchased products on your Vimeo Weekly Dharma Gathering account. You'll receive an email notification once it's posted. And then about Dr. Smalls. Dr. Shanté Paradigm Smalls, whose pronouns are they, them, is a teacher and student in Vajrayana Tantric Buddhism. They currently study under Lama Rod Owens and Lama Justin Bonwujdos. I probably mispronounced that. Co-founders of Bhumi Sparsha. Shanté began studying and practicing Buddhism at age 17 and has practiced in Zen, Soka Gakkai International, Shambhala, and Bhumi Sparsha communities. They began on the teaching path in 2009 and were authorized by the Shambhala lineage to teach meditation and Buddha Dharma in 2015. Shanté is focused on the healing impact of meditation in Black, Indigenous communities, and people of color communities, LGBTQ plus communities, and incarcerated and recovery communities. Shanté is a teacher on the Liberate app and is a lead teacher on Weekly Dharma Gathering, which they co-founded and curate. Shanté identifies as a Black person descended from enslaved and trafficked African Indigenous people. Shanté is queer and genderqueer. They live on the Canarsie, Muncie, Lenape-Hoking territory in Brooklyn, New York. So Shanté, please teach us.
Thank you so much, Gail. I so appreciate you and your in myself here and your recording and your enthusiasm and energy and commitment to the Dharma and also to Weekly Dharma Gathering. It's thankless work, and you are just an incredible human being. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate you twisting your tongue over many different languages in my bio. So thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to see you, and good to see everyone tonight. It's nice to know everyone here who's here, and oops, I was trying to do something there. Oh, there we go. And thank you for joining, those of you who joined live, and thank you and welcome to those of you who are watching this in a different time, in a different place. So first I just want to check in a little bit and say I'm just feeling funky. I don't know. Happy Gregorian New Year. Not bad in any way. I'm not feeling badly in any way, but just extremely tired and feeling a lot of energy, but also this incredible desire to really, really, really rest and really, really slow down, to really at an individual level, at least, resist the capitalist grind. And I have been thinking a lot about freedom, and I actually want to talk a little bit tonight about the differences and similarities between freedom and liberation, which both in common English and in Buddhist talk get used changeably, but I think they're slightly different, both in their meanings in the kind of world and in spiritual spaces. But I want to talk a little about that. But I also want to talk about, and hopefully do a little bit of it. I was thinking about a little bit of it, a contemplation around what freedom in different areas of our lives. So in lieu of a like sitting meditation, more of a contemplative and maybe even a writing contemplation. So, I think it feels like a very long time ago when David and I were conceptualizing this series. It feels like years ago. Like everything has changed and nothing has changed, and and it was Mark and I were talking. We ran into each other on a COVID PCR line a few weeks ago, and neither one of us ever got our results from that shady van. But so it's 2022, junior year of COVID. We're in our junior year, started our junior year of COVID-19. I mean, it's going to go on. We're going to be grad students by the time it, becomes really endemic in a way that's not really detrimental to health around the world. But I recently, just this past weekend, was really had the fortune to and the privilege to offer refuge vows to about 11 or 12 people. And some people, I think, were maybe taking them for the first time, but many people were renewing their vows. People from different, some from who were in former, what's that, Three Jewels people, some Theravadan folks, some former Shambhala people, some former, I don't know, other Sokogakai folks. So, it was a real, some people who were non-denominational, who had done secular trainings and practices. And there was a real, it was really beautiful. And it was like a lot of Black women, a couple of non-binary people. It was very, one Latinx person. It was very interesting. But one of the things that was really fascinating in that our classes, and then in the ceremony weekend on Friday and Saturday, was that Sangha was actually, and it's the sticking point for many people when I talk to them in their individual interviews and also in some of our discussions. Everyone's like, oh yeah, I can get down with the Buddha, and I can get down with the Dharma, obviously, but the third jewel, Sangha, has been really understandably impacted for so many of us. Whether that's we've had a bad, we've been in Sanghas that have hurt us or hurt other people and therefore hurt us, or we've been in Sanghas that seem a little, that are a little stale, that are a little rigid. Or we've been in Sanghas that feel like they're not oriented toward what we think of as freedom and liberation, which is as I think about it, as a total thing. It's not something that's separate from our lives, right? It's not some kind of spiritual trip or spiritual intoxicant, or people just didn't ever have Sangha. And so, this Sangha really activates this kind of like Buddha Dharma relationship, because it's where we not only practice, but we get support, and we see we have to have that interaction with other beings and other beings that are human. So I'll just say that in conventional terms, particularly in the United States, freedom is sort of unfettered, do whatever you want. Really, whether it hurts other people or not. It's sort of like just autonomy. It's freedom is not something given, it's something you are, in the sort of extreme kind of libertarian-esque view of in the US kind of white masculine sense of it is you're free to do whatever you want, right? And there's not really rights and responsibilities. Maybe there's your own consciousness or conscience, but you're just kind of free. You have freedom, ultimate freedom. It's like what are those movies I've never watched, although you would think I have because I love horror movies, the Purge movies, where you get like one night to murder people or whatever and everything's fine. Whereas liberation or liberty in that kind of US sense is freedom with responsibility. So it's like it's can be given to you and taken away. It's like I read an example that said you are at liberty, you have the freedom in your job to take days off when you're sick or vacation or emergencies, but it's so that's the idea, but it's really actually a liberty because you have to ask permission. In the Buddhist, or at least my kind of conception of it, liberation is actually more it's like almost inverse. It's more valuable to me because liberation is one, not individualistic. So, and that's not a bad thing. It's interdependent, it's social, it's communal. So liberation for one means liberation for all. That's really, getting more into the bodhisattva kind of quality in Buddhist teachings. But even in sort of Hinayana, this idea of personal liberation is about not doing harm to others, right? As well as yourself and in your environment. So there's always a quality of interrelatedness. Freedom, I think in Buddhism is, or in this talk, let me say, maybe back up from Buddhism, is really kind of the baby step before liberation. I mean, it's quite a big baby, maybe a Bigfoot baby. But freedom is really related to, let's say, a personal practice. And freedom here is, I want to qualify it as freedom from a kind of self-consciousness, freedom from the karmic or the habitual thoughts that tell us we can't do it, freedom from the kind of doubt or laziness that prevents us from being curious about our experience. And that freedom, that's unbound, leads to liberation. And so this type of freedom is really not about tyranny as such, except for, the tyranny of the small mind. The tyranny of the ego, that the ego actually gets a bad rap in Buddhism. I think ego really is trying to protect us. But what ego doesn't understand is we don't need protection. We need liberation. And so ego, does things to get us through the cracks of experience, either high, fight, flight, freeze, or sometimes annihilate. But when we begin to experience freedom, we realize we have more choices than those kind of reptilian reactions. And I think in freedom and in liberation, there's a quality of play, playfulness, curiosity, gentleness, experimentation. I was talking to a friend or I got an email from a friend, also someone who says I'm their mentor. I was like, oh, hey, I'm okay. Um, I've known for a while, and she sent me an email about something that had happened, and I was thinking about how even sometimes when we're trying to be correct wrongs, that we can kind of build communities around that are rigid, right, in order to protect from harms, right? But then we produce other kinds of harms, or we like live in a kind of resentful state. And I think freedom in meditation sense, freedom from kind of the doubt that prevents us from trying, or that the freedom to say, I don't know, or the freedom to say, I do know. Sometimes I think that freedom really, I don't know how well it works, going back to the Sangha thing, in really big Sanghas. I think this is a little bit of my own agenda, where I really have questions about the legitimacy of really big organizations, whether that's a corporation or, I work at a university, and I'm like, this is not flexible and responsive enough to our time, to our moment that we're in. And it's not that it's bad per se, but that those models of, big corporations or big sanghas or big, universities are meant to be, they're meant to be conservative. They're meant to be slow. They're meant to be, they're not meant to be flexible and pliant and responsive and proactive. They're not bastions of freedom or liberation. They're meant to reproduce themselves. And so I've really been, because of my own experience in being a former member of a very big, wasn't a mega church, but I mean, being a member of a big, relatively large international sangha that was collapsing, I think, long before the big boom of the scandal with the head teacher, Sakya Rinpoche of Shambhala International, was collapsing already. But what it opened up for me was this idea, that was this question: can I experience freedom and liberation in an organization that is meant to kind of reproduce itself? And if I'm inside of an organization where I have to practice fugitivity, which is really a Black practice in the Americas, then maybe that's not a place of freedom. Maybe that's not a place where liberation can flourish. If to feel like getting the juice is forming little groups and doing things on the side, and those community groups or those social groups feel like where the Dharma is happening. And so sometimes we're forced into freedom. Friends of mine who are in Insight or in different really big Buddhist organizations. And this is not really, actually, truthfully, any disrespect to organizations. Organizations do a lot of good. First of all, they get us together. We meet each other and we get to practice. And that's really important. But if, everything is impermanent, then what does it look like and feel like and taste like and smell like to practice on that edge of freedom with other people? So these are the things that are that are going through my head, in part because we're watching in real time systems that need to collapse, but they're collapsing, but a lot of people are getting caught in those collapses. It's not just like an aesthetic or a philosophical, oh good, they're collapsing. Lives are being taken, stolen. But we're watching in real time, just thing after thing all over the world, collapse, collapse, collapse. And it's easy and natural to feel, at least for me, a sense of, I was talking to my older brother about this last week, that there's a form of protection when things end or dissolve is to be like, okay, this is it, it's done, rather than see that as a process itself. So living in real time in dystopia, you know, what is the role of really liberation from samsara? I can tell you a little bit about how I've experienced it. I'm experiencing it, and just I'm in it, so I don't know. I might say something different 3 years from now, but if I'm alive. But in my practice, so this is a fine line. So take it wherever it lands for you. May it be helpful. So my meditation practice. So first, I'm going to ask you just to think about your practice, what it feels like, what you do, what feels like practice to you. Maybe that's being in your shrine room, sitting or walking or chanting. Maybe that's working with family, systems, your own and others. Maybe that's your paid work. Maybe it's something else. And now just think about your practice 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, some chunk of time ago. Has it changed? Has your idea of what practice is expanded, contracted? Is it inclusive of more or less? Is it rigid or is it looser? And I ask this, or to do this little exercise, just think about how practice itself emerges, abides, and dissolves. Whether that's you're introduced to new practices, or you begin to practice in different spaces, it actually can't look the same as it did when you first started practicing. Really can't. And I sometimes feel, I look back with fondness because I was very rigid when I first started practicing. And I sat for very long periods of time every day. My practice simply does not look like that anymore. It looks much more like, I look less like a monastic. And there's plenty of sitting, but there's also other aspects of it's kind of snuck up on me. And it's kind of taken over my life. And so when I'm out in the park walking with my dog, um, because sometimes there's a nice little spot we like to go to, but I like to go. I don't. She'd like to go everywhere, but I like to go to, and I just rest my mind on that. What's happening, and the water, and the sirens, and the birds, and the joggers, and the bikers, and she's eating human poop or whatever she's doing, and sticks, and there's dogs and people walking, and it's a kind of a quiet corner, and there's the sky, and there's the lake, and there's the trees, and there's the wind. And what I began to understand is that there has to be a quality, there has to be a reality of, if I want to really be experience liberation, um, I have to really begin to mix my mind with the world. And that's not always pleasant. One of my teachers, Lama Justin, um, it's very nice having working with two teachers, because Lama Rod and Lama Justin, though they are very good friends and they've known each other a long time, they're very, very different in how they teach. And I get very different things from them, but I like that they know each other and that they work together. It makes it really nice for me. But Lama Justin, I feel like Lama Rod reminds me about being a human, like the experience in my whole, humanity. Um, and um, Lama Justin is constantly reminding me of, my inevitable dissolve, and how important it is to embrace the reality of death. And living in a city like New York, there's a lot of opportunities to practice, because it is a charnel ground. It is a place of great suffering. And there's an incredible amount of energy here. And rather than kind of trying to escape from that or block it out, it's like opening up, opening up. And then I begin to experience a different kind of doubtlessness or freedom. I start to experience a different level of possibility, because I'm not so wrapped up in my practice looking nice and neat, you know, and I'm not so concerned with um, people liking me. I'm not so concerned with um, achievement, but really it's in the small things. Because this is a really bad time in the world right now. It really is. I'm so grateful for all the humor on the internet, and I'm so grateful for that there are people who have really buoyant um, energies, but this is a bad time. I mean, it's not easy, and we're all, I assume, everyone who's alive is like suffering, you know. At the same time, we know from teachings that we trust that there is an end to suffering. And that end to suffering is not holding our breath and wishing it and praying it goes away, but it's taking on what we can. If that's granular, that's enough. And working with that. daily, moment to moment. So maybe your practice looks different than you want it to look, right? That's okay. I think it's okay, because it's really, if our orientation is toward liberation, then we're going to want to practice eventually, because we're going to want to experience liberation for self and others. So, sometimes I get really frustrated. There's a lot of powerful forces at work that seemingly don't want people to get well, or to have health care, or to have jobs, or to stay home if they're sick, or, just, and these are things I feel it's important that I, I feel like I've been this way ever since I was a kid, where I don't, what people should have homes, people should have food. People should have homes that have heat in them. I don't know if y'all, there was a devastating fire in Philly last week or the week before, and then a devastating fire in the Bronx just a few days ago. So there are all these, I've been paying attention to these really horrible fires. And partly because of neglect of the landlords. And then I see how these things are connected. So in this fire in the Bronx, it was started, someone had a space heater. And so people are kind of saying, well, we need to talk about fire safety. That's true. But part of the reason why people had space heaters is because the building had almost 200 violations for not having heat and hot water, which in New York City, you're required by law. The landlords are required by law to provide heat and hot water. Then you find out that the landlord is on the new mayor's transition team. And you wonder, okay, how is this gonna, 19 people died, including mostly children. And, many, many people ended up in the hospital with smoke inhalation. This is on top of COVID, and right. And so sometimes when I see these big structural things, I feel there's a small part of me that wants to close down and say, fuck these people. And but then there's this other voice or feeling that's like this buoyant spark that reminds me of my responsibility in this situation. Not that I caused the fire or the landlord's negligence or anything, but that there are ways that I can help materially, or spreading the word about the different, lots and lots of people are helping, but also deepen my commitment to liberation. So I don't know if y'all, Pema Chodron, in one of her talks years ago, she tells a story of how there was, someone was walking around and they were complaining of how hot the earth was and wishing that they could just cover the earth with leather. And then they realized, oh, I could put the leather on my feet. That'll solve the problem, right? And so sometimes when I want to cover the earth with leather, I have to remind myself to put the leather on my feet. That's what I can do. So, what is it I can do? And our practice, the reason that we can experience freedom from habit, from laziness, from doubt, from distraction, from forgetfulness, is because and eventually experience liberation for self and others, is because our practice has power. We don't talk a lot about power. I don't hear a lot of talks about power, but it's not just wisdom, it's power. It's power to transform us, to transform people around us. And not in some kind of whammy, I'm trying to go around whammy people, but just by being. By experiencing our own neuroses. That has some of the greatest power. Everyone wants to be like a shiny, bright-eyed glowing Buddha. But first we have to like go through our um, neurotic fields. We have to go through that to finally be comfortable with being a human being and really experience what it is to be a human being, which is what the Buddha discovered. You know, after he only came to that after almost dying, starving himself to death, dehydrating, and Sujata, farmer's wife, was like, "Who's this fool? Skin and bones," and gave him some rice milk. Perhaps she was his greatest teacher, right? Because then he realized, oh wait, what am I doing? Let me just find simplicity rather than trying to manipulate my experience to make something happen. Freedom was found in simplicity, not running, right? Not manipulating. And from that simplicity came his freedom, and from his freedom came the liberation of so many beings. I mean, before him, there were other Buddhas, you know, lost to time in history, but he's the one of our time that we know of, you know, in this last couple of millennia and a half. And I think, you know, because of the, you know, we're in this portion of the world, we're in the winter and it's darker earlier, and maybe it's at least for me, there's like kind of feelings of melancholia sometimes, and a feeling of a kind of I just saw something about a space hotel or something that they're trying to build in by 2027. It's so ridiculous. It's like, what? Space wants you to kill you. That's like it doesn't want. It's like a luxury hotel in space. Anyway, they haven't watched enough science fiction movies, obviously. But I mean, this is like where our world is, a space hotel, right? Um, my goodness, right? So, this is a very interesting time in the world. And one of the really, I think, good things about our human experience is that, and about the earth, it seems, is that things are, though this is a sharp point in history, things seem to be cyclical, even if we weren't alive in this form for that cycle. So humans have survived a lot of stuff. You know, we're built for hard times, right? People have survived decades of enslavement, of plague, of famine, of war. And those aren't ideal situations, but we're built for this. And those of us who have encountered the Dharma can connect to each other and support each other because, you know, our mental and physical and emotional and spiritual health does suffer under these kinds of conditions. We're not invincible. And that wasn't exactly the word I was thinking of, but we're not immune to these drastic changes in rhythm. So maybe what I could ask you to take a few minutes, and you can either do this as a kind of contemplation or a writing, is I want you to think about freedom and liberation in 3 areas of your life. One of those being your meditation or contemplative practice. But so what does, and I'll join you in doing it, but what does freedom, what do freedom and liberation look like in your practice? That could be what you're doing now, or that could be something you aspire to. And then 2 other areas of your life that you know, of your choosing. So we'll just take a few minutes, and it doesn't have to be, a whole plan, but you could just kind of jot something down. It could be like, more humor in my practice, or more whatever, right? More sitting. But what does um, freedom and liberation look like in your practice? And then, 2 other areas of your life. So I'm gonna just jot down. If don't, you know, if you feel like you have like a lot to say after this session is over, it's something you can return to, as a contemplation. About a minute, and then we'll come back. So I know I was still going, but it's something that, of course, you can, I encourage you to continue. Does anyone want to share anything they wrote? I mean, obviously you don't have to, but I want to just open up the space if you'd like to just share.
Hi, Shanté. Thank you so much for your teaching. So beautiful to be with you. I've missed you. um, yeah, you've given me a lot to think about tonight. I think I need more than 5 minutes for the freedom and liberation meditation. That's probably gonna be the week. But yeah, a lot of what you've shared was super valuable. You know, that feeling of being tired. I was sharing that in another fellowship that I'm in this morning. It's not tired related to, right? Like I'm not tired because I'm stressed or tired because I'm working too hard or tired. It's just this weariness is the only thing I can use to describe it. And it's not seasonal. It's not post-holiday, like, you know, and I think part of that is kind of what this exercise has brought up too, is that need to identify, right? To slap a label on it and then put it in the cubby. And okay, I understand now, so I don't have to deal with that anymore, which tends to be my my go-to. Yeah, and also the value, you know, you've shared this in prior talks, and it's been super valuable, right? That the practice, the sitting practice is wonderful, but that's how my practice has changed in the many years that I've been doing it. And I think especially in the past couple of years, um, there's a spaciousness now that because I'm more isolated and things are not convenient and happening at the snap of a finger, and there's been this reevaluation that there's been an opening and an opportunity there to be practicing, right, in conversation with somebody at the bodega, right? Or I do a lot more walking meditation, you know, often that's my, you know, I need to go to Target to buy toilet paper. It's like, well, you know, rather than counting my steps or listening to blaring music or, yeah, the past several months, it's just been, oh, it's an opportunity to just be present. Sometimes it's more formal with, you know, with paying attention to my steps, but oftentimes it's just being still and observing, right? What's happening in that space, and that feels like progress in my practice, because for the first 10 years it was all punitive, right? Like I wasn't doing it right, I wasn't doing it long enough.
Yes.
I was never going to get it. Like it was always goal oriented, right? Like I meditate because I want to be more peaceful. I meditate like because I want to be less of an asshole. Like there was always an end game, right? Which I don't feel that way anymore. Those are benefits that occasionally happen, far from perfect, but there's been something, especially I would say in the past year. I love being in that space, and so it's not a question of having the right cushion and the temperature being correct and the candles being lit and the incense burning and you know, I mean, all those things are lovely, but I realize I can enter that space anywhere, and it's to everyone's advantage. You know, when I'm feeling super reactive to a client or to my parents or to, you know, on a date, God forbid. You know, it's there. I I have access. All I have to do is be willing, right? But anyway, that's but thank you. Yeah, this is, I want to take a little time with this, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Shanté. Nice to see everybody here. I guess I'm thinking about and would ask you about, Shanté, your thoughts on freedom within forms, because you talked about a few, you know, there's a certain kind of formless, like you mentioned, not practice looking less monastic, more of a formless practice of being with the world as it is, and you know, also the dissolution of organization, the dissolution of forms in some sense, and particularly, you know, we could say you and I share so much out of the Shambhala tradition where there were many forms, that it is easy to, you know, ascribe a certain like being almost like incarcerated by or trapped by or oppressed by, and you know, I'm wondering, though, I also had the experience of discovering tremendous freedom in those forms, and I think that that's a lot of there's a lot of wisdom that comes out of, particularly when we talk about like sort of some of the Eastern Buddhist, you know, cultural traditions that did take from monastic situations, that did take from, you know, various ways in which there was the form, which, and it could be interpreted as being rigid or punitive or all those other things. And there was this other side of it where there was a certain freedom that could be gained by, you know, logging a lot of hours on the cushion, being inside complex rituals, you know, a number of different things. So I'm curious, as you're talking a lot about, you know, formlessness and dissolution, and then reflecting back on your experience of freedom within form, and then what place might that have in sort of, you know, for your practice. I'm thinking a lot about it from my practice, but curious from your perspective.
No, that's really a great question. And I think, you know, as with everything, they're interrelated. So I mean, we could just like look at the Heart Sutra, you know, so like form is emptiness, emptiness also is form. So this idea that I would say we don't want to go one way or the other, but I think there's a lot of playfulness that happens in form. And I think actually, you know, paradoxically, one way you get to the playfulness is by logging a lot of hours on the cushion, partly because, at least in my experience, I began to see the absurdity. The more hours I put on the cushion, the more I saw, like, yeah, I just saw the absurdity, you know, and the more I think, for me, it's less about the, you know, form versus formlessness, and more about, I just lost my train of thought. And it's more about what happens. It's more about my commitment to practice and what happens when I actually, what can be opened up when I'm, when there's a dissolve between making practice something special, you know, that I do in like this little corner, and when it becomes much more of its own, it begins to infuse my life. And so I think in that infusion, at least for me, there is definitely formal practice. And also because I continue to study with teachers, I'm I'm constantly being, there are formal practices that I'm being asked to do. Am I doing them? Sometimes, you know, and there's a tremendous amount of wisdom that comes from formal practice. So, you know, I just literally, you know, was really interesting doing the refuge vows, you know, because some people, it was like holding a lot of different experiences and levels of comfort with form. So when I said the word prostration, some people were like, you know, and other people were like, yay. And so we talked a lot about both. So I gave people some freedom, you know, I was like, okay, here's like the things you do before you do the refuge, you know, formula daily. And they said, you can do these particular, you know, practices, or this is what they're indexing, like asking for orientation towards why we do this, motivation. Then there's a chant that's around connecting to lineage. Then there's a practice that's around, you know, Heart Sutra, that's around compassion practices. And so it's like, if you want to replace those with things that are more meaningful to you, yes. So for me, it's not that we do away with form, but that there, as you're saying, there has to be some flexibility, pliancy, playfulness, because form actually teaches us about our mind, about our, it allows for some kind of depth and safety, context. And not only when we really master it or really know it deeply can we then really begin to play, right? It's not like we just start doing whatever, you know, day one, but that becomes something desirable. Because when the form, if the form becomes, sometimes, at least for me, I know that when the form can become the practice itself, right, instead of what the form is holding. And also that we have to be able to create forms in the West, Buddhist forms, you know. So ritual form is so important to every living being. That's not, you know, something we can get rid of. At the same time, how are we open to the rhythms of arising, abiding, and dissolve? Part of that is being able to hold yourself, right? That's like that's a form itself. I mean, just sitting, right? How we sit. It's a kind of natural sitting posture, but it also is kind of like designed to support our mind when you're sitting cross-legged, for instance. So I think that there's a lot of form always happening, but what's our relationship to form? I think is, what's my relationship to the forms that I'm doing, right? Do I know are they meaningful to me? And I think for me, what's I've had to do is remember and rethink the meaning and the value to me. So I'm a very, very formal person. I enjoy structure, I enjoy form, I enjoy ritual. I spend probably way too much time on it, but I very much enjoy, it's very important to me. There's a lot of preparation, you know, in Buddhism that I think is actually very valuable and has a lot of wisdom and is really a lot of times for our own protection. And so, you know, that as someone who teaches, you know, that's very important to me, obviously, you know. So it's sort of holding that. It's holding both of that. It's doing both, doing formless practice and doing form-based or formal practice. Not not one or the other, but both. You know, so I'm like a person who does, you know, chants, or I guess back in the day, I used to say prayers, you know, before my meals and everything. There's a lot of ritual in my life that's informed by my, you know, my apartment right next to me is like someone bought this me. It's two like Thai Buddhist, you know, images of Buddha from Thailand, and so I have a lot of I get a lot of um, sanity out of ritual. I experience a lot of sanity. So my challenge is to not hide in that and to not make it too tight. But I think, and I think the danger, I think this is why it's important for us all to have teachers. You know, I do think that that aspect is so important, or a mentor, or Kalyana Mitra, a spiritual friend who's a little bit ahead on the path, farther along on the path than we are, because I don't want to ever be like, this is also actually interestingly part of freedom and liberation, is that relationship with a teacher. I don't want to ever be just like willy-nilly doing whatever. So I think that we always have to ask and interrogate and investigate our relationship to form. Some forms need to be dropped, some forms need to be taken up. And I think that's really important. So for me, you know, I know I talked about, you know, resting my mind in the lake, but to me, there's still no feeling. I don't get, it's a very particular feeling I get when I sit on my cushion. It feels like nothing else in the world. And there's a lot of energy in that cushion that, you know, is a lot of energy in that zabuton. And I've just, there's so much practice has gone in there. And so that's really important. I also think, and I mean, I don't know, for some reason, David, I always think of you when I mention this topic, but I also think where form for me also really comes in, and where I think is really important, and I think is not emphasized enough in American, you know, US Buddhism, is retreat. And I mean deep retreat, you know, I mean like, oh, a weekend, but like, you know, at least a week, preferably 2 more, you know, and that kind of commitment to our practice changes our relationship to form. I think that's where we begin to see why it's important, and then we begin to deepen our relationship and we can play with it. But yeah, it's like anything. It's like you have to learn the scales of your instrument first, and you have to actually perfect them and be able to play them skillfully before you can improvise. And so, and then you, even when you're a great musician, you always play scales. So it's like you never leave anything behind. You never graduate. But it's more like, it's kind of like more responsibility, more accountability to yourself and to others. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of form itself being a way that can wake us up, you know. So I've had, you know, particularly late in the last year, or maybe not 2, but maybe late in the last year, I've had a lot of profound experiences around daily things like making tea and like making dinner, because I've been really taking my time, and like washing dishes, things that like when you first start practicing, these are all the examples that teachers give and you're like, yeah, I got that, you know. But because I really have nowhere to go. There's no rush on my time. For the most part, there's things happening that I am noticing, that I can like ritualize. It's just like, wow. And the feeling of just like, you know, I use cloth napkins, you know, like just like, and you know, then they go in the laundry, you know. And so that has been something about, you know, just like I try not to eat like out of a carton. If I order food, I try to plate it, and it's not like a value thing, like it's more valuable or you're bad if you don't do that, but it's about form. And form helps to slow down some of the speediness and some of the kind of know-it-allness. And that's there's just tremendous power again in form. So I want to encourage people to explore both form and formlessness.
Yeah, it's super helpful. Thank you, because you are like your form, I've always just marveled at your very natural embodiment and love and reverence of form. And so it's been really great to hear in this series, really multiple times you talk about kind of where your practice is now, but bringing form back in the way you are is just like a complete picture to me. Like you're painting a full picture of a practice and a life, which is, I think, really, I mean, bringing it back to basic goodness is that's it, right? It's like discovering basic goodness in form and formlessness, all 360.
I think what you brought up has also been really making me think about in the dissolve of so many systems, how those systems kind of, even when I think many of us were trying to make carve space, they were just so powerful in pushing us, and I think about all the people who like moved out of New York City, even though there's still a gazillion people moved into New York City, but all the people who moved out of New York, and you being one of them, and people I talk to, and what they've been able to do with their lives, and it's really, there's something significant about when you do change forms, right? And when you do change kind of ritual, and not just for its sake, but through the wisdom that arises from one's own discernment, you understand there's something new that needs to happen. And in that sense, I think I've been discovering different kinds of ways of relating to what meditation and what Dharma is. And for instance, one of the things that I wrote down for myself is that, particularly, I already know that last year when I was thinking about 2022, I was like, I want this year to be a year of more practice and study with my teachers and less teaching. So I'm kind of wrapping up my teaching commitments in the first part of the year, and really trying to spend most of this year in terms of my meditation in retreat and practicing and studying with my teachers. And so understanding that relationship too, there are more intensive years of whatever you're doing, and so that is part of, like, I'm feeling like I've had a couple of years of some formlessness, and now I need, like, this year is going to be much more about logging a lot of time on the cushion because in essence, that's what's needed. Like, practicing, I feel like I want to get to a place in my life where I can really be practicing a lot, and that can look different, but that's what I want to be doing. So that's a real orientation. That's a real, like, view rather than kind of like a goal. It's sort of like, that's my orientation. It's going to take some time, but that's the hope.
May it be so.
Yeah, thank you. I receive it. Maybe just a few more minutes. Another question from anyone or comment? So one of the things I, have been thinking about is this relationship between flexibility and consistency. Even in my own practice, being flexible, being pliant, but also being consistent and being committed, you know? And so not just being like, oh, I watch TV and I meditate. It's like, no, like, what is my being flexible in being committed in my flexibility, right? That it's not just I'm doing this or I'm doing that, but what is my orientation? For me, my orientation is liberation of all beings, right? From, including myself, from, you know, suffering in this lifetime. So that's a like lofty goal. It's doable, they say, you know. And so the collapse of these systems feels like it's it feels like an opportune time. So yes, why people are building space hotels, there's also room to, it's also, look it up. I was like, I can't do it. But there's also room to, there's also an opening for us to say, I'm gonna just go for it. You know, I'm just gonna do it. You know, I'm just gonna do this. And that is the kind of freedom I'm talking about, you know. I'm just gonna do this. And I, you know, for myself too, freedom to reclaim, you know, David was asking about form, freedom to reclaim, you know, lineage, freedom to reclaim things that are meaningful to me, and being able to separate that from personalities or from organizations or from, but say, this is meaningful to me and this is in me, you know, and I'm not going to discard it because of, it's sort of like I always say to people, well, I'm still living in the United States. I'm still living in this. I mean, I haven't left, you know, I could leave, but I have not, I've not, you know. And so how do we reclaim, you know, wisdom? Wisdom does not belong to anyone. It belongs to all of us. Dharma belongs to all of us. And for me, and really talking to people who have left sanghas, whether it's Shambhala or Soka Gakkai or Insight or various Theravadan sanghas, there's two kind of things that happen that I've seen is where I think people lose kind of freedom, whereas they abandon everything they've learned, or they just kind of are rigidly adherent. And I think there's a middle way where we can remember what's valuable. And what I have discovered is that my practice, my heart changes my practice, right? So that I can inflect and infuse the forms that I've learned in a way that they actually really become mine, because that's what's supposed to happen anyway. We can't really practice in translation. We have to have, and what I mean by that is, I mean, we can say things in Sanskrit or Tibetan, but what I mean by that is that this has to be meaningful to us personally. And so for me, that's been a lot of bringing ancestors into my practice, which is, you know, Tibetan, you know, Vajrayana is indigenous. You know, when Padmasambhava brought Buddhism to the wild west of Tibet, all of it is infused with Bön. You know, even though there's a Bön lineage, a Bön Buddhist lineage, and so the same thing has to really happen. We have to really infuse our practices with lineage, whether that's cultural lineage or familial lineage or historical lineage. It has to be meaningful, right? It's not the Buddha's Buddhism, in that way, you know? And so that's the wisdom of the, 84,000 dharmas, is that we have to really, we can point out a lot of ways that like the US and capitalism fuck up dharma, but there's some really cool stuff that has happened in the West when when dharma's been brought to the West. It's really spread, sometimes it becomes just pop culture, whatever, like, oh, I'm so zen, but great that's a word that's in people's mind, meaning some kind of freedom from worry. So yeah, I think that's it. My hope and my aspiration for all of us is that we really begin to feel and experience the power of our practice together, and that, I'm really I'm really oriented towards the small Sangha. So let me go back to what I was saying in the beginning. Like I am a Sangha is, I think, is so valuable. But I think it has to be smaller, insurgent, and we have to be able to talk to one another. And the hierarchies have to be different. Hierarchy is not a bad word, but they have to be different. They have to be infused with wisdom, flexibility, love, and ultimately the liberation of all beings. That has to be it. I mean, we can change the world. I believe it so deeply. With every fiber of my being, we are in such an important moment for transformation. There are so many people working for transformation and liberation. It's very powerful to see. And yes, there are many, cuckoos doing the opposite, but that's always going to be there. But we all who believe in freedom, as the song goes, can really can do this. We can do this together. So thank you so much. I'm gonna, continue my little exploration of what this freedom and liberation look like, in my practice and beyond, and I hope you do too. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Shanté.
Gail, I'll turn it over to you.
Helps to unmute. So thank you so much, Shanté. For me, this has been really helpful. I've been really struggling with a lot of closing down, and you've really reminded me about touching in and seeing the sacredness of the moment. And I also am very heartened by your faith and belief in the possibility of transformation for this world, because it's way easy to lose that faith. So I have some announcements. So thanks to everyone for joining us tonight for the online Dharma Gathering. Please join us for next week's weekly Dharma Gathering for the final installment of Encountering Basic Goodness with Part 8, Reflections with our very own David Perrin. Yay. Please consider becoming a subscriber if you are not already. We have a 7-day trial that you can find on our website. Tell your friends. In addition, make sure to follow us on all the various social vehicles out there, Instagram, Facebook. You can find all those links by going to Linktree, and that's linktr.ee/weekly Dharma. And you will find our links for Facebook and for Instagram. So yes.
I put it in the chat for you. There you go.
Excellent. So thanks all.
See you all next week. Thank
Yay.
you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed
Thank
that.
you.